All right, guys, welcome back to the show. There she is. There's my friend. There's my friend. Well, listen, if we're going to do certain things in our country in a certain way, if we're going to have policy that's about enforcing certain rules, guidelines, laws, however we want to phrase it, we have to do it with a certain amount of dignity and respect to the rule of law here in the United States, and then how we go about navigating that outside of the country. What am I talking about? Melanie Nathan's been with us before, and she is the executive director of the African Human Rights Coalition, and has been focusing on the rights of all folks when they get caught up in the system. And that's a phrase that, I've used. I don't use it lightly, but they've had to deal with our government's immigration policy, or as I would call it, treat people you don't like with disdain policy, because it's not about immigration right now. It really is not about that. Melanie, welcome back to the show. How you been? Good to see you again.
Good to see you too, Richard. Thank you so much for having me back.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll start off with this, and I mean it. Are you staying safe? Are you good?
That's a great question. I really appreciate that. I basically haven't left this desk since since the last time we spoke, because this administration has us tied to our desks.
Yeah.
And, it's the desk, it's the courtroom, and it's rinse, wash, repeat, sleep, eat, and
Get back
that's
after
it.
it again.
Yeah. But to be honest, nothing feels entirely safe when you watch and observe how all these freedoms are being decimated.
Yeah. One of our other contributors to the show and guests on the show is immigration attorney that's based in Austin. Her name is Kate Lincoln Goldfinch. I think Kate will be on with us in the next week or two. And she speaks of it the same way. She stays, sleeves rolled up and elbows deep, constantly in the fight. Wash, rinse, repeat, because, the federal government isn't letting up. And one of the things that she said, Melanie, a couple of visits ago, she said, Richard, we aren't hearing as much about what's happening with immigration like we were at the beginning of the year. We aren't hearing the stories. We aren't hearing the tragedies, but they still exist. And in fact, she said that, media, corporate media specifically, hasn't really been reporting on things as much. And literally the next day, the issue in Texas took place, and then the issue up in Maine took place. And I just wonder, what's your take on how corporate media in the United States is, in your view, handling what's going on with immigration since, the beginning of the year, when we were seeing, it seems like we were seeing something every day, if not every week.
Yes. Well, one thing I've noticed is where I think we are failing is we're not doing a deep dive into the human toll.
Mm-hmm.
And it's massive right now. What I would think needs to happen is this country needs to hear about what human beings are being subjected to beyond just, and also very importantly, when somebody's killed by our government through the actions of ICE, murdered on our streets, that's huge news, and that ought to consume us. That said, there is a much larger picture at play here. We're having human beings who have been in this country who are by a long chalk not the worst of the worst, who have been in this country for many years, established themselves, have families, children, jobs, pay taxes, being taken off the streets and sent to third countries where they've never been in their lives. And there is no reason for this except to, if you will pardon the expression, de-brown the country. And it's, you know what I mean? I mean, it's proven by the fact that he's bringing in the white South African Afrikaners. That's who he's focused on. And that's his humanity. And these are not even real refugees, in my opinion. There might be an exception or two, but not as a general rule, and not enough to create an entire program around. All the while deporting thousands to third countries where they've never been. So to your question on the media, I would like to see the human stories told. in depth, and a lot more of them.
There are so many of these stories, and so many that are I guess I shouldn't say so many that are. They're all tragic, because deporting people to a place that they've never been before. I don't know the law, international law, well enough, but my instincts tell me that there's got to be some human rights violations there that might be in the same paragraph as war crimes, to some extent, or certainly civil crimes against those individuals, because if they're being deported to a country that they're not originally from, if that's the litmus test we're going to use, that's cruel and inhumane. Would you say differently to that?
It leads to that, but
Okay.
the problem is that what this administration is doing is actually lawful for the most part. It's lawful until it's not. So they have the right, under legislation, to deport people to countries where they have ACAs, asylum cooperative agreements. So this country has entered into, I believe, between 26 and 30 such agreements, bilateral agreements with other countries. So countries would include Uganda, Ghana, Eswatini, and of course, a host of other African countries. Legally, they can deport people. They can't deport people who have protection orders back to their own countries of persecution. So what they are doing is they're using Africa as a deportation holding for people that they want to get rid of, and they're not the worst of the worst. So what is happening is it is lawful, but here's where it goes wrong. Things have to happen to keep it lawful, for want of a better way of saying it. So the first thing that has to happen is they have to be sent to a place where they're not going to be persecuted and where they're not going to be tortured. That's number one. Number two, they need to have access to a fair procedure that can give them asylum or temporary asylum, and certainly protection. So that's where the misstep happens, because most of these countries are incapable of doing that. So the minute the person leaves the American shore, this administration can divorce itself from the responsibility of what that foreign country who is receiving the people under the agreement is actually doing. And what we are seeing is that when they arrive, and I'm generalizing, there's a lot of different scenarios here, but in general, what we're seeing right now is, for example, a person from Cuba can be sent to Central African Republic. A person from Guinea can be sent to Ghana. They've never been there. They don't have any connections to anything. They arrive, immediately get detained, and they get taken by the receiving country to a border and dumped. You can be a woman who has been subjected to female genital mutilation, and you have terrible trauma and psychological issues, and you find yourself on the border of Ghana and Togo. It's just absolutely inhumane and horrendous. And I agree with you, there has got to be some kind of accountability. But a government that doesn't care about its own sailors?
Yeah. Here we go. Melanie, so let me ask you this question, and then we'll take a quick break. The word, when you talk about the agreement being bilateral, that basically lets the country that's receiving human beings, these folks, to not have any responsibility because it's not a unilateral agreement. Or am I looking at it from the wrong angle?
I think you kind of look. Well, here's how you have to look at it. They have an agreement with America, and the U.S. is paying them money to do this.
Okay.
Where is the accountability? Where are they act, when I say bilateral, it's one party talking to the other party. So it's Ghana talking to America and saying to America, we'll take
okay, I get it. I was thinking
Yeah.
that the country that then receives the person that, okay, I had it out of order,
Yeah.
because I was thinking
Yeah.
bilateral means they both agreed. Unilateral means one agreed or one put it on the other. But it seems like the U.S. is acting in a unilateral way inside of a bilateral agreement.
And vice versa, probably.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Got it. Got
Yeah.
it. Melanie, let's take a quick break. The number is 773-763-9278. I'm Richard Chu. Keep it locked in. We'll be right back with more of Melanie, Nathan, and Chu's Views. We'll be right back. All right, guys, welcome back to Chu's Views. If you're just tuning in, I'm Richard Chu, and we are talking with Melanie Nathan, Executive Director of the African Human Rights Coalition. Melanie, this is a question, and I know that you have a huge amount of expertise here. I shouldn't say many, some of the countries that folks are being deported to, where they, one, don't have any sort of connection or affiliation in the first place, never been there before, et cetera. The other thing that's happening, unfortunately, is that they're being deported from the United States to countries that have a strong anti-LGBTQ code or rules and laws. How is this further impacting? Because not everybody that is being deported to these countries is of the LGBTQ plus community, but in some cases, they're being handled, if you will, as though they are. Talk a little bit about that, if you can.
So let me make a distinction. In these African countries, there are about 34 out of the 54 that criminalize LGBTQ people. And criminalization is not just about getting arrested and going to jail, it's a lot more, because it licenses extreme violence. And what's really important to note is that if a refugee goes from, say, Uganda to Kenya, who's an African, by normal standards, for want of a better way, heterosexual people will be seen immediately and registered as a refugee if you leave your country and you go to another country. But if you are LGBT and you go to another country and you stake your claim, which has to be truthful, I left my country because I'm LGBT and I was being persecuted, that government in the next country, which is supposed to register you, says, I'm not going to register you. You're asking me to register you under something that we see as criminal. And so they refuse that registration. So now let's say you had a gay person who sought asylum from, say, Uganda, who's in America, and they now get sent to Ghana. They are subject to whatever rules and laws Ghana will put them through to accept their claim and to further their protection. Well, this is a terrible situation because that person is not going to have the requirements of the ACA met to be able to do that. And they're going to, more likely than not, be persecuted in that third country, Ghana. Heterosexual people don't have that layer. And so that is, I don't know if I'm answering your question at all, but that is a massive difference for LGBT people. What I find fascinating, when I first became aware that this was happening sometime a year ago, and people were calling on me to write country conditions reporting as an expert witness in these cases, I saw that some LGBT people were being sent from countries even like Ecuador, were being sent, who were gay, were being sent to kill the gays Uganda. You know, recent legislation providing for life in prison and the death penalty for LGBT people. Now, we were able to get a lot of those cases stopped. I'm concerned about the thousands probably of cases that don't have the resources of legal representation, a country conditions expert, and who's there in these different areas now that have just been put on a plane overnight. We are getting some contact from people in different situations, and it's dire and it's hair-raising and the resources are depleted. You know, it's like the perfect storm,
Yeah.
because when this administration took over, it stopped a lot of the funding for the resources that sort of embraced the services needed. For example, UNHCR, which is the major protection agency providing services and resources on the continent of Africa, lost an enormous amount of funding. And then there was none of this backup funding for safe shelters and this kind of thing. So I know that they had to reduce their operation to the tune of about 30%.
Wow.
And so you're just having a massive humanitarian crisis. It has always been there as a crisis, but now it is so much worse. HIV clinic services, trauma services. It's just terrible.
And this indirectly, maybe indirectly is not the right word, but there's a dotted line to the the essential elimination of USAID, because those funds were in some cases the backboard. Even though they were there to generate sustenance, they were also there as a backboard for people who were unfortunately being displaced, that had been deported over a period of time. So this is that moment where we look at all that the administration is doing, and their goal to do what you said, which is to I hadn't heard that one before, to de-brown the United States. It definitely shows that there's a tremendous amount of calculated cravenness in what this administration is doing on a federal level right now. Let's talk about this as we wrap up. Melanie, what are your steps? I guess is what comes to mind for me. What are the steps? What are the ways in which we will be able to either stop this, slow it down, or move it in the other direction? And as it relates to what the United States can be doing or should be doing?
Well, first of all, I cannot stress enough how people need to get to those midterm polls and vote the right way. Vote your conscience, vote for humanity, because ultimately, you might think you an American protected because this has got nothing to do with you, but that's not the case. It has everything to do with us, and it's beyond just the humanitarian aspect. By 2034, we thought we could eradicate HIV/AIDS, and we're seeing all sorts of diseases come back that don't need to. And, and there's also a whole lot of reasons why Africa is important to us. And so people really need to go and vote. I see every hole and vacuum being taken advantage of. And so when the right politicians, the politicians who care, are legislating and having the power to legislate, and there's a president that can sign good legislation, we need to go beyond just repairing, because first of all, there's going to be a lot of repairing to do, and it's going to take a long time.
Yeah.
We're screwed in that way. However, we cannot just do that. We have to go beyond and make sure that we shore up all these holes and all these vacuums that have allowed this to happen, right up to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Right up to the Supreme Court. In my opinion, we need to have more justices. They need term limits. They need ethics. It cannot be politicized. All of that needs to happen. So there's a lot that we're going to have to do when the time comes, and it starts with voting the right way right now. I don't know that we can sustain this.
Yeah, I've said for a long time that, one of the tools that the current administration is using, and frankly, some of their global partners, and when I say that, I mean folks like the Israeli government and the Israeli military, the Russian government, the Russian military, and many others. Part of their game plan, Erdogan in Turkey in his reign, part of their goal, their tool, is to distract, and to try to depress people from showing up to vote, making it harder, but also by the things that they do to make it something that is maybe life-threatening. And that's what our country is heading toward. So I know that people get tired and they get frustrated with what's happening. And I know that people need to take a break, need to take a deep breath. And I say it at the end of every show because of what we're up against. But right now, probably the number one thing that every one of us can do is to stay connected, to talk about it, to not run from it, to run toward it, and do it with a team of people. Don't do it necessarily in a silo. Melanie, it's always great to see you and talk with you. How can folks find you real quick as we wrap up today?
Appreciate that, Richard. So my website for African Human Rights Coalition is africanhrc.org, and you can see the work we're doing there. I would encourage people to consider donating to us as we try and help people. It's almost impossible, but also to even consider helping with donations to UNHCR, who do an amazing job. They're just the very little bit that we have left. And so I encourage people to, even the smallest amount of money to the UNHCR or African Human Rights Coalition or, any other such organization, it will be very well received.
Absolutely. Melanie Nathan, thank you once again for being with us. She is the executive director of the African Human Rights Coalition and one of the strong voices across the globe helping us stay on point when it comes to human rights. Thanks, Melanie, for being with us again this morning. Stay safe out there.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Thanks so much, Richard. I really appreciate it.
We'll talk to you soon.